Hi, my name is Austin Alexander, and this is my presentation over intellectual property and combating internet piracy. So, to begin, first we need to define some terms. So, intellectual property itself is kind of a vague term that gets thrown around a lot, but the basics of it come from the name itself. Intellectual property is the idea that the products of your intellect are your property. The things that you create are your property. Now, this can extend in three different ways, three main ways. Uh, there are trademarks, patents, and copyright. So, trademarks refer to things that are logos that mark your brand. So, like logos, titles, slogans. If you want to think about it, think about Coca Cola's name and their logo. Or you could think about Nike. For Nike, they have their brand, their logo, the Nike swoosh, and they have their slogan, which is "Just Do It." Those are all trademarks that aren't allowed. Other companies are not allowed to use those because they are specific markings to specific trades. Next, we have patents, which are essentially rights to an invention. When you come up with an invention or a new idea or improvement, you can get it patented so that you're the only one that is pretty much allowed to produce that. You're the one with the rights to that invention. And then we have copyright, which is if you have the right to copy and produce a certain material. And everybody naturally has the right to copy and reproduce their own works that they create. They can, of course, sell this right, they can give it to a company, they can produce a company can produce something and then they have the copyright for it. But at the end of the day, it's stuff like art, photography, films, and music. Those are all covered by copyright, which is the main one we're going to be talking about today when we're talking about internet piracy. So, internet piracy, if we want to go and define that, is essentially violating a copyright to reproduce and redistribute somebody's copyrighted material for free. Now, there are a couple of different ways that this can be done. For example, if you were to go out and torrent a movie from, say, some random streaming site and they illegally pirated it, technically that makes you a pirate. Uh, but a much worse example is seen whenever you look at those sites themselves, these illegal streaming sites, and the people who create those and upload content to them are the worst kind of pirates because they are actively fueling the market. But those are two distinct kinds of internet piracy. So, a couple more examples, and actually some controversies that happened fairly recently. Uh, there was some legal action that was put forward by this company known as Triller in reference to some piracy. Now, they had essentially hosted a stream of a fight between two big celebrities, two big fighters, and they made a decent chunk of money off of it, but not as much as they seem to have wanted. So, what they ended up doing is they looked for as many people as they could find who they knew had the streamed the fight illegally, and they put forward a legal action to sue them for 100 million. Now, this is big because most companies tend to just accept their losses. Like Game of Thrones was a very pirated show, but HBO didn't exactly do much whenever it was pirated. They just kind of took it because they were still making a lot of money anyway, and so is Triller in this case. But they decided to take action, and that's kind of a big step. Another controversy is actually quite recent in legislation. So, right before Donald Trump left office, he signed the COVID relief bill, which actually had a provision in it that referred to piracy, the internet piracy. And what this referred to was that anybody who was committing internet piracy could potentially face up to 10 years in prison. Now, this is a big step up from the previous penalties, but luckily, this doesn't refer to individual pirates, people who just go on these sites and stream it or torrent these movies illegally. Instead, it's mainly referring to the people who set up these sites and the people who pursue internet piracy for some sort of financial gain. Essentially, the biggest players would have to face prison time of up to 10 years, which is a step up from what was before. Next, there are some positions on internet piracy. And I know that sounds strange because it sounds hard to imagine how you could be for internet piracy unless you were just saying that you want to do it yourself. But we'll get into that. First, the obvious position is to be against it. For one, it harms sales. Everybody who is pirating the content is essentially enjoying it free, whereas normally you'd have to pay for it. So every single person who is pirating your content, if they were unable to do that, a decent chunk of them might pay for your content. And so every single dollar that isn't paid to you, but they still consume your content, is a dollar lost. So that is a big dent in sales, especially for streaming companies. Furthermore, with more piracy, there's decreased incentive to make new stuff. If a creator makes something and then it's pirated and they barely see a cent from it getting popular, then there's not much incentive for them to make new things. At the end of the day, why write a book if you're not going to see a cent from it? After all, most creators tend to treat their creations as their job. Most book writers hope that they're going to get money from their books. But piracy discourages that in a way. Now to look at the much stranger and smaller side, people who are actually for internet piracy. Now, one of the main reasons is that it's done to essentially protest exclusivity. Now, exclusivity in this context is being used to refer to streaming sites, or I guess other platforms as well, potentially, that only offer one thing and no other platform offers it. For example, with streaming, if Netflix has a show, Hulu may not have the rights to that show. Netflix may have a exclusivity deal that means they're the only ones that can broadcast it. And they especially have this with their own content, but they can also have these deals with completely other companies. So distinct companies. What this can end up doing is that if all these companies are mainly focused on exclusivity and getting these individual rights to these shows, there's not much of a reason for them to improve their platform. After all, people who want to watch the show can only come to them. So if people want to watch that show, it doesn't matter how bad the streaming is, they have to pay up or they can't watch it. Piracy offers an alternative where individuals can pirate the show and instead get it that way, which of course is illegal, but it is a source of competition. What this means is that these individual streaming sites actually do have to improve themselves to be worth it over the free option of piracy. Now, of course, there are some flaws with this argument, such as the fact that internet piracy really affects the creators directly in a lot of cases, because these creators might have deals with these streaming services, etc. So the main issue that they're focused on, though, is that these brands and these streaming sites can be anti-consumer in how they produce their content. And piracy offers a source of competition and encouragement to actually improve their product. So how can we battle it? How can we combat internet piracy? So there are a couple of these. There are a couple options here. And the main thing that these come from is from there have been tons of studies done on internet piracy and how to deal with it. And one of the main ones, or one of the easiest ways to comprehend it, is the legal punishment route. So we can see this in two ways, actually, when we go back to these controversies. So both of these are essentially pursuing legal avenues to discourage piracy, but they do it in different ways. For one, the COVID relief bill mainly is a threat. That's a threat to pirates to essentially say, hey, if you do this, you have the potential to be locked up for 10 years. But threats don't work unless you make good on them. So that's where we can see the opposite thing in Triller, where they're taking direct action through the legal avenues to essentially make their money back and directly harm these pirates and discourage them from doing it. So by threatening and following through, these people may be more scared of the legalities and may flock away from these piracy sites, may not even create them in the first place. And that would definitely decrease the piracy and increase sales of the companies. Furthermore, there is improving the legal sites themselves. Now, what this essentially comes from is if you look, the people who are for internet piracy actually want this. They want these professional legal sites to get better, which is why they like the competition aspect of piracy. So if these companies were to improve, a decent chunk of the people pirating would actually show up to these legal sites and have their money going through the avenues that might get back to the creator, which would be a very good thing. Uh, and finally, there are mass piracy site takedowns. Individual piracy site takedowns really don't do too much. They seem to be fairly ineffectual because all the people that are in them, all the people that are using one site, they can just move to another site. There's no reason for them to stick around, especially because if their site got taken down. So they'll simply go around to another site and get their piracy that way. In this way, it's compared to the Lernaean Hydra, in the way that if you take down one head or one streaming site, uh, it doesn't do anything to destroy the beast. Instead, two more will just rise to its place. So instead, what may be a better option would be to do a mass site takedown. Go to a bunch of the major sites and do an instant takedown of all of them. Nobody will be able to float around and look for another site because all of them are down at the same time. This might be enough to actually discourage these piracy sites from coming back up, at least for a while, which would increase profits to the actual creators and the holders of copyright. Uh, but in my opinion, and also in another opinion of the aggregate study that I have listed at the end, the best way to combat piracy is through a combination effort. Doing all of these at the same time will definitely increase sales for legal avenues. Having legal punishments actually in place that work and are followed through upon would discourage people from doing it in the first place, and at least would make people questionable about whether or not they want to continue. Improving legal sites makes people want to potentially go back and pay some money to watch what they're watching. And the piracy site takedowns is just a direct wall to place in front of these people trying to get to their piracy sites and stream this stuff illegally. So by doing all these at the same time, we'll be able to move a decent chunk of the piracy population into the legal avenues to actually spend their money. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you for your time. Here are all of my sources. This is the aggregate source right here, the one that essentially compiles this is the one that compiles a decent chunk of them. Not peer reviewed, but it compiles a decent chunk of peer reviewed papers together. And it was mainly there just to find for certain that piracy does actually harm sales, which it does. And here's this source right here. This is where I got the Hydra example from MIS Quarterly, the effect of piracy, website blogging, and consumer behavior. Very, very strong article, peer reviewed. Went through and essentially saw that by blocking a decent chunk of these sites at the same time, there is more of an effect on the streaming population. But that's my presentation. Thank you for watching, and have a nice day.